Hello everyone, welcome to The Download, where we give you the discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, the Feast of St. Mark the Evangelist. I'm Brad Eli here with my two co-hosts, Simon Rafe and Christine Niles. And joining us today as a guest host is Kyle Copey. Hello, Kyle.
Hi, Brad.
Education. It's an important part of a thriving society. Modern educational institutions have gone down the toilet. This is especially true of Catholic schools and especially Catholic colleges. So many of these places are in the tank for homosexuality, abortion, and contraception. It's a huge scandal that's ruining souls of the young. But first, we'll be talking with one of our reporters, Nick Wiley, about blowback in Scotland over a Catholic school having a Catholic textbook affirming Catholic teaching. Hey, Nick, tell us more about this story in Scotland.
Hey, Brad. So some educators in Scotland are concerned about a book being used in, like you said, Catholic schools that, just holds to simple Catholic moral teaching. Last week at a city council meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, one of the councillors complained of the book's orthodoxy and was declaring the Called to Love curriculum, which teaches Catholic values, much of which are very commendable, but still includes chapters on how marriage should be between a man and a woman and how homosexuality is a sin. Shocker, right? She also reported this upset students and even admitted that she herself refused to teach that chapter to students. But, she admits that, kids being curious went behind her back, behind the school's back, and was still reading it and got upset. So she claims that type of material isn't in line with the values of the city council, and it doesn't fit the pro-gay agenda of Scottish education in general.
Well, exactly how long has this all been going on there?
Yeah, right. So if you remember, in September 2021, Scotland became the first country in the world to make what it calls LGBT inclusive education as part of its school curriculum. It basically became a way for teachers to curtail any lesson in any subject to the gay agenda. One of the reasons they said it was to combat bullying of children. So whether they were, themselves identifying that way or they had a family member, to combat the bullying, they needed to, soften it up for all of the kids. All the kids needed to experience this LGBT history, and even in math lessons or writing essays, it had to be curtailed in some way to making it more palatable for kids to accept. So one of the big groups that was behind this is called TIE, or Time for Inclusive Education. So in 2019, one of its co-founders said in an interview, "Everything we're trying to do here is all very, very Christian. It's all looking after one another. It's about respecting one another, and it's about caring for and loving one another and producing healthy young people."
Well, that doesn't sound too Christian, let alone Catholic, Nick.
Yeah, I don't know where they're necessarily getting this from, whether it's from the, just the reading of the Bible where Jesus loves you and the only commandments are love of God and love of neighbor, and whatever they conflate that to mean. One thing that I found particularly laughable about TIE's website is that they claim that, quote, 9 in 10 pupils we worked with said that they no longer use pejorative language like "that's so gay" or derogatory slurs after their indoctrination training. And it just reminds me, a friend of ours, John Doyle, he said on Twitter one time recently, "If I'm not allowed to call my friend gay, Western civilization will literally cease to exist."
At what point does this just become anti-Catholic bigotry or discrimination against religion? Because this is basic church teaching. Marriage between a man and a woman. It's what the church has always taught for 2,000 years. She's never changed it. She will never change it. It's basic church teaching. And for, this agency to come in and say, "Oh no, this is hateful. We can't teach this in schools."
Yeah, that was something that the city council itself is kind of struggling with in its meeting, is like, okay, we know we have to respect religion. It's something that we have to respect in our government. But we also, they are forced to respect these pro-gay agendas. Like, it's through all the curriculum in all Scottish schools. I mean, I don't know what the necessary difference might be between Catholic schools or more public schools, but they all have baseline curriculums of they have to teach, some kind of LGBT history, and they have to incorporate it in lessons in different ways. The Catholic schools, of course, throw in their Catholic teaching too, but it can't be reconciled. There's nothing you can do to reconcile the two, and that's why they called for, we need increased dialogue with each other. That's what they were using, the same terms that we like to throw around in the liberal church circles of, we need to keep more dialogue is what's going to help us come to a better resolution.
Right.
And Nick, it seems like that, a lot of people aren't familiar with the educational system outside of the U.S., but as you kind of alluded to there, it's sort of this situation, and this is similar to what's going on in Canada, where many of the Catholic schools are sort of in bed with the state. The state will really control like the non-theological curriculum, the math, the science, and all that. All that is run by the state, and the Catholic school has to kind of kowtow to whatever the state is saying there. In the U.S., it's actually not that case. There's a lot of, Catholic schools that are even diocesan schools that really don't have to adhere to state principles. But I found it interesting that some of the press, some of the reporting on this is labeling this as this textbook in particular. They're labeling it as an anti-LGBT book, and that's not like the entirety of this textbook. I mean, I'm sure that's there. It presents what the Catechism says about the Church's definitive teaching on homosexuality. And I did a little bit of research on that, and it seems that this comes from our Sunday Visitor, this curriculum. So it's not that this book is just totally anti-gay. I mean, there's a lot of other good stuff in the book.
Yeah, that's why the teacher herself was like, basically saying is more one chapter, and that she just skips that chapter. I mean, it's nothing to her to necessarily. She wants to do away with it because it's there and because people might see it, but she's not going to teach it. And so, how do you know how many people are actually sticking to what the textbook says, teaching it faithfully? And the point you brought up was good. In the fact that it's almost worse here in a sense of we choose to just go along with a lot of these things in a lot of Catholic schools. They're forced to do it in the whole of UK. They're forced to have all these things in their curriculum no matter what school it is. And talking about in Canada, we kind of just joyfully go along with it here and hire whoever and put in liberal talking points and whatever. So it's kind of even that looks worse on us.
Yeah, Nick, I'm kind of, one thing that obviously most Americans will have, their knowledge of Scottish history comes from movies like Braveheart, and hearing you talking about this, obviously this big pro-LGBT thing there, I'm reminded of the infamous scene in the Braveheart movie where Edward Longshanks, the Hammer of the Scots, throws his son's lover out of a castle window for being gay and leading his son astray. And I'm wondering, it's like maybe Edward should have hammered the Scots a little harder. But are there any stories that you've heard or reports as to how this kind of thing is actually playing out further afield from Edinburgh and Glasgow and the major cities? Because in Scotland, of course, once you get up into the Highlands, once you get out into the islands and so forth, these are dominated in many ways and really culturally still dominated by small, very traditionalist, very conservative Christian religious communities, Protestant communities, multiple times schismed from the Catholic Church. But are there any reports as to how this is playing out there? Could there be kind of a fight at the peripheries between the traditionalist Scots and whatever is coming up from London?
It's hard to really know because in terms of Scotland, it's supposed to be all of Scotland is supposed to have these things in place. They're all supposed to have these workshops and these different curriculum additions and all that. They're all supposed to do. Whether some people are curtailing around that, of course, you see that everywhere. There's probably, I'm sure, schools that are defying this, but it is part of Scottish law that all the schools are supposed to be like this in the whole of the country.
Well, I will remind people that even the Emperor Hadrian gave up on trying to pacify Scotland, and Edward Longshanks didn't do it for terribly long. So I'm intrigued to see what the Highlanders will do on this one.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a good question. We'll have to go back and circle on that. See how they're handling it. I don't know if the government would want to go in there and try to force this upon those people.
Yeah, Nick, I can't help but hear the word bullying. They always build that straw man argument, and then anything goes after that. If you're trying to accomplish something good like stamping out bullying, you can teach anything but the Catholic faith there. Well, thanks for chatting with us, Nick. Moving on to this education, sticking with that theme in a sense. Kyle, you were in Catholic education until you got fired for your job. You want to tell the people that you kind of fell on the sword there a little bit, and how that
fell on the sword? They stabbed him.
How that actually kind of tailored your view. We've had some views on educating also your own family and taking a strong role in that as a parent of 3 boys here. So dial the parents out there in, and then the other teachers out there on what they need to do to step up.
Sure. I mean, as many of our viewers know, because we've reported on this in the past, yeah, I am a former Catholic school teacher for almost the past decade before I came to work for Church Militant. And yeah, if you want to hear the full story, you can read about it on our website. It's called Fired for Quoting a Saint. I have an article. There's a mic'd up on it. You know, maybe a Vortex too out there. So, you know, our audience can check that out. So I've been in the trenches, so to speak. I've seen a lot of this stuff. You know, I taught at one of the larger all-boys schools here in the Archdiocese of Detroit, and you know, going into teaching into Catholic schools, a lot of people have rose-colored glasses. They say, "Oh wow, they're going to get a good Catholic education. You know, the behavior is going to be top-notch." And as a new teacher, I found out that just really wasn't the case.
What actually did you get, so just so the parents know out there and the teachers, what exactly was the topic that you got fired for?
Sure, briefly, now I would have expected it to be some type of, you know, homosexual issue, LGBT stuff. You know, I'm just presenting what the Catechism says. But no, it was actually something I didn't expect. It was, I quoted a saint, basically, St. John Brebeuf, one of the great Jesuit missionary martyrs of North America. And it was on the feast day of the North American martyrs. And I simply presented a lesson on that. I had a quote from St. John Brebeuf, and he talked about, he referred to the Native Americans as pagans and savages. My goodness, when those terms came up, you know, the lid blew off. You know, I actually had Native American kids in the room. I myself am actually, you wouldn't know it by looking at me, but I have Native American blood as well. So these are my people we're talking about.
More than Elizabeth Warren has.
Exactly, yeah, slightly more, 1/16 or whatever. But yeah, so when that came up, you know, using those terms in our politically correct context, that's a terrible no-go.
Did parents complain?
No parents. Well, parents complained on my behalf after I got fired for simply saying that you know, those are actually theological terms. Pagans is that you don't worship the one true God, and savages, that refers to immorality. It was just the French word for it.
Whose decision was it to fire you?
This was, I guess, a joint decision, you know, by certain members of the administration. I'll tell you this: we had at this Catholic school, we had a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at a Catholic school. So once word got to people like that, I was basically persona non grata, and I was forced out. But yeah, I had a lot of blowback, a lot of parents pushed back, you know, people pulling their kids out of school.
Well, that really underscores the whole idea that if you're a parent today, you think, you know, you can send your kids to Catholic school and that's it. You know, you're getting a Catholic education because it's a Catholic school. Whether it's, what grades were you teaching there?
I mean, I taught 9th through 12th, all high school.
Okay, and the same with colleges. I send them to Notre Dame or wherever, you know, you're getting a Catholic education out there, but it's not exactly the case.
Well, I think it's most interesting that the issue wasn't that Kyle came out and said, you know, look, these, you know, Native Americans are all savages. He didn't come out and say Native Americans are savages. He didn't say they're subhuman redskins. He didn't come out and do anything like this. He, you know, didn't come out and say, you know, Custer was done dirty and he should have, you know, gone in with more men or something like that. He didn't do any of that. He said, let's quote this saint with what he said. And let's quote, obviously, as you said, he's speaking of French. So there's actually there's a very specific term with regard to that. And then there's a whole discussion that can be had of, okay, well, what does this mean? And why was he using this term? Is this a term that we would use? All of these things that would happen. But obviously, no. It's like you used a term that was pejorative. And the most ridiculous thing, I think, within that one is that the term that was considered pejorative is pagan. It's like pagan is is a very measured, very precise term. It means one who does not worship the one true God. It's like talking about heretic or schismatic or anything like that, heathen, etc., etc. All of these have a very precise meaning, and they're only pejorative if you presume that Christianity is correct and true and there's a moral obligation to be a Christian. And even then, they're not truly pejorative. They're just like descriptive of the
But
same.
they sound mean, Simon.
They sound mean. Yeah, I sound mean. I just use the word redskin. It'll probably get bleeped out.
Yeah, that's completely ridiculous. But yeah, parents cannot just expect to throw your children into Catholic school, even if it has a good reputation, and then that's it. You have to be vigilant over what your children are learning. You've got to ask them, okay, so what did you learn today, etc. Because in my experience, as I've mentioned several times, I put my children in a good Catholic school, and they were run by good Dominican habited nuns who were taking over the school and bringing back orthodoxy and things like that. But that didn't mean that it didn't have problems. There were still problems there. We had a problem with, my daughter was going up and one of the extraordinary ministers forced communion in her hand. My daughter, because I always teach them receive on the tongue only, they wouldn't allow her to. They forced it into her hand. So I actually had to call up the principal and said, this is happening. Are you aware of this? So they made sure that never happened again. But then there were teachings too that some of the more iffy teachers were teaching, students. And so I had to call up the principal, who's a sister, and mention these things as well. So you have to be totally vigilant over your children's education. It's just naive, and it's a dereliction of duty for Catholic parents to think, oh, let me just throw them in Catholic school and I'll go on with my work, and they're going to absorb the entire Catholic faith in a faithful way. That's not going to happen.
Well, I think there's something very important there that you talk about being vigilant, and I think it would actually, in many ways, start even sooner. That your children, if you can be as vigilant as you like with regard to formal education. So we're going to watch the curriculum when they're in primary school, watch the curriculum in high school. We're going to take care in college. We're going to go through and audit the classes and watch and do all this kind of stuff. But then they're going to get out into the wider world. You have to inoculate your children. You have to inculcate them with a sense of the Catholic faith, or even just a sense of rational inquiry, a sense of skepticism, a sense of, hey, that doesn't sound right, or, you know what, that's a different opinion, but it's contrary to mine, and I'm feeling strong enough to stand up for this. Look, I went to college, 2.5 decades ago, which kind of I think is, your college era is a little earlier than that, Brad, because you're a little older than me, and Christine, I think you and I are about the same age. But 2.5 decades ago, I was there, and even then, at college, there was this whole slew of lefty garbage there, because obviously that's just kind of what happens at college. That was always the joke. But there was this whole slew of lefty garbage and this whole slew of ideas that were, clearly wrong and clearly dangerous if put into practice. But I'd been well raised by my parents with a sense of skeptical inquiry, with a sense of my own, confidence in what I believed, so that I could stand up and say, well, this is no good. And I think we've got a lot of parents now who seem to be kind of abnegating that responsibility. I'll send my kids somewhere to be educated, and they will be educated. It's like, no, they're going to be indoctrinated. You need to provide them with something so that they can stop and say, no, that doesn't sound right, and I'll listen to it, I'll take the class, but I don't believe it.
Well, I think since COVID hit 2020, a lot of parents are starting to have their eyes opened because they have to have these group classrooms, and all of a sudden they start to see what's going on in the classroom. And there was a big rise after that in this whole homeschooling push, and the idea that you need to actually take an active role. But Kyle, I think you were going to be talking more about inoculating, really, going well beyond not just being observant of what's going on in the classroom, but taking a leading role well before that, as far as educating your children and getting them up to speed, not only on the Catholic faith, but humanities and formation and all that. Do you want to talk to the audience about that?
You're right, Brad. It does start well before that. They used to have these like little pamphlet things, and I don't know how many teenagers would do what with a pamphlet nowadays, but they used to have these things like how to stay Catholic in college, and good reputable organizations put these things out there, and there was some good stuff in there. But you're right, it's got to start way before that, and it starts with the parents. The whole faith life we talked about, on previous shows about building that up in the home. That's really going to go a long way in that inoculation that you mentioned, and when we put them out there. if we ever really put them out there. Because, you know, for many families, that's a consideration too. Keep them home for as long as you can. Obviously, socialize them, bring them out into the world, but on your terms. You know, don't just send them off. That may happen in certain circumstances, but guide them into the world as a parent and say, here's what I do, observe what I do, and that's really how they should learn. So yeah, I mean,
well, you have quite a reading list here that you put together for the humanities and what you would think of a great books reading, and you're starting to read to your kids at a very early age.
Right. I mean, reading is super important. There's, you know, we talk about homeschool. There's educators out there who really have taken this sort of simplified look at homeschooling, and any you know, mother with multiple kids at home will tell you this. Yes, make it simple. I don't have time to do all this, and this. You know, we talk about science and history, and all that stuff's important, but the foundation of that is really the language arts. You want to have your mathematics in there if you're a homeschooler. You want to keep them up on that, but you really want to push the language arts. You know, it's kind of hyperbolic, but there's a reading specialist who I know. He recommends this. He's like, if you're stressed out with homeschooling and you don't know what to do, what curriculum and all this jazz, doing all this research online, all you really need to do is take a couple months off, even if you took a year, and just read out loud to your children. That would do more for them than anything that you could come up with on the fly, anything that these public schools are doing. I mean, because my goodness, the literacy rates, the ability to write.
Just latest news reports on that.
Crazy.
Tanking.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you ask college professors about this, and they lament, because I know people, I know some professors, and they lament that these kids coming into my classroom cannot write. They cannot read. They can't understand, you know, compound sentences, you know, intricate paragraphs. They just can't do it. And we're not getting this on the lower levels. And that's where the liberal arts comes in. That's where just simply reading to them, kids pick this up. They pick up the cadence. They pick up, you know, the syntax and all that by just being read to.
You know, they also putting out there, we've had trouble with the religious schools. We had trouble with diocesan religious schools. At CCD, catechism, sending your kids to be educated at the parish level. I was involved with that. Have a war story back in the past. We were teaching confirmation class 15 years ago, at least, and we were just teaching the 10 Commandments, nothing crazy, and it was, well, you know, on the Sabbath, you need to go to Mass. Well, a lot of these parents are divorced, remarried. A lot of them don't go to Mass. They wanted their grandmother saying, take my kids to catechism so they can be confirmed, because they thought they have to be confirmed to get married. That was always a kind of a wives' tale. Anyway, so we're teaching them, well, there's things about venial sin and mortal sin, and the separation from God is mortal sin for all eternity if you die that way, unfortunately. And, well, yes, by the time we got to the third commandment, yes, it's a mortal sin if you're not keeping that. And then by the time we got to the sixth commandment, you know, divorce and remarriage and that type of thing, and that's also more.
You've lost half the class.
You mean my parents are going to hell? It's like, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say anybody's going to hell. Of course, there's mercy and repentance and all these things. I don't know your personal situation, but my parents.
But yes.
Anyway, there was huge blowback, fireworks all over the place, parents complaining. We're trying specifically to be very sensitive to the situation, because we know it's difficult things. But you got to get through the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
And a confirmation class, my goodness. The priest, Father LaPlante, I can say his name, he's probably dead now. God rest his soul. He was a very delicate man, and I didn't know how it was going to go. And he actually then stood up and he said, you know what? I don't need anybody's permission to teach all 10 commandments. And we're like,
good for him.
We got it. So it was a wonderful thing. But I'm telling you, if you send your kids to the catechism classes at the parish, thinking they're going to get the education, send them to religious schools, send them to diocesan schools, thinking they're going to do it. If you're not there well before then to help them out, you can't always just review things after the fact, because your kid may not even be able to explain what's going on in at that classroom level.
Yeah, I have to thank COVID. I have to credit COVID for my decision to homeschool all 4 of my children, because, you know, I understand women sometimes come to me and they feel very intimidated by homeschooling, which I completely understand. I was intimidated by it. You know, I'm a single mom. I work full time because I have to. And so I was like, there's no way that I can homeschool 4 children and do this at the same time. There's simply no way. I started to homeschool my 2 older ones because they were just like, Mom, you know, we don't want to continue in this because there were problems at the school and so many rowdy children and a lot of disobedience, and just it was not affecting them well. They would come home and we would have problems, and so I decided, okay, I'll homeschool the older 2 because they're old enough, they're disciplined, they can do it. COVID hits, and I'm forced to start homeschooling the younger 2 because, you know, you had to get out of the classroom, so you had to do everything online. And I thought, you know what, I can do this. This is actually not that bad. It also depends on the curriculum that you get. You know, I'm going to give a plug for Seton Homeschooling, because Seton Homeschooling actually lays out all the curriculum for you. The teachers will grade pretty much all of the tests for you. And so you have a supervisory role. You can still be involved, but at the same time, you can still do the things you have to do. As long as your children are self-disciplined and they can sit down and they do the work that they're supposed to do, which fortunately my children are. So it's really not that bad. I would encourage, and it's so much better too, because at school, you waste so much time. Oh my gosh, you waste so much time in school. As someone who went through the entire public education system, you can finish your homework in like 20 minutes, but you're sitting there for the rest of the hour because your classmates aren't done and you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. Yeah. You know, but what my kids love is they get up, you know, they don't have to wake up super early. They get up, they finish their work probably in like 3 or 4 hours, and the rest of the time they have free time. So
yeah, kids don't need to be in school for 7 hours a day. That's crazy.
Well, I think
before we go on for a second, you want to share one success story though about your son. Very
Oh
wonderful thing.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Bring that up.
Homeschooling. So my son, okay, so he's just a smart kid. Okay, he was born with smarts. He's very good with data, with facts, and with math. And so homeschooling with the math, and of course the parents being very involved, his father as well, being very involved in helping to teach him math. He got a perfect math score on his SAT. And now we have some of the best colleges in the nation that are courting him. I'm talking like Notre Dame, once they give him a full scholarship, University of Chicago, all of these.
Well, what score did he actually get on the second time around on the SAT?
The first time he got a 1340, and I was like, you can do better than that. And so second time, what did he get? 1550, right?
And 1600 is like a perfect score.
Yeah, he got
perfect.
He got 750 on the arts and literature side. Yeah,
and
he got 750.
800.
Yeah, and 800 on the.
So that is extremely high. I mean, he could write his own ticket basically. Get a full.
He is going to get a full ride. But you know what? My entire approach to higher education has completely changed. You know, I think you had something to say, Simon. So
go ahead there.
Well, no, I was
talking about homeschooling. It worked because you know.
Well, there's actually, I actually wanted to talk about this whole. You just saying, Carl, that this whole notion that we shouldn't be sending the children to school, or children don't have to be there at school for so long out of the day. So the current model that we have of school is actually kind of based on an industrial revolution German model to produce productive factory workers, which is probably like, okay, that's legitimate, but not necessarily why that's not what people are thinking they're sending their kids to school for education. And you know, obviously you can look to this question of, okay, what are we looking at education for? Do we want to produce a productive worker who can fit into the economic industrial system and make money and provide for himself or herself and their family? Or do we want to try to actually make a well-rounded, well-educated person, which is a wholly different thing. You can get somebody who's incredibly well-educated but has zero practical skill. There was my Uncle Richard, incredibly educated man, has multiple PhDs, but stood there, literal, true story, stood there with a wet dish in one hand, after having just been washed up by my mother, wet dish in one hand, a tea towel in the other, and said, and I quote, "What do I do?" So there you are, incredibly educated man. But with regard to that, the issue of education, I went through, just as an example, I've got various history education that I did. I went through the pre-GCSE history, GCSE in history, A-level in history, and did some courses at university in history. And every single time, what it was the teacher essentially explaining the history there, and he would explain the dates and the facts, and he would provide context and so forth. But obviously, there's a limit to the periods of history that you can look at. I focused on the Industrial Revolution and the great dictatorial powers of the early 20th century in Europe. Recently, I found on YouTube, and this is a huge thing for homeschoolers and just people who have finished their education want to do, YouTube, there's this whole slew of these great documentaries, about an hour long, every single piece of history that you want to do. I spent, over the weekend, I must have watched, because it just fascinated me, 12 hours on the Plantagenets of England. And I knew it kind of sort of. Now I am like an expert on the Plantagenets. I can discuss the Plantagenets in detail for that thing. This is how you can learn. Now, obviously, I don't have a qualification in it, but if you're interested in just becoming a learned person, that's the way to do it. Because college, what's the value of it? You go there, you get your degree, you spend a fortune on it, but you end up with like $100,000, $150,000 in debt, or the rest. You get your degree at the end of it. You have some knowledge in this subject, but perhaps it's no practical application knowledge. It's like, how is this going to help you get a job? Now, if you want to go and say, I'm prepared to spend $250,000 just to say I'm an educated person and I know many things, absolutely, that's totally legitimate, 100%. But you're going to step into the job market with this albatross of debt around your neck, and you can't utilize all this effort you put through in your 3 or 4 year degree to actually earn any more money. You're like, well, I have this degree that doesn't help me get it. The guy who went to the vocational college or the vocational apprenticeship, he's a plumber. He's an electrician. He's what have you. He's earning twice what you are. He has no debt, and he started earning 4 years before you. Yeah, I'm not a big fan, to be perfectly honest, of the whole model of college education. Because if you want to become an educated and learned person, there are ways to do it, and you don't end up going away for 4 years to this hive of degeneracy. My parents they were teachers, and they went to Scraptoft Teacher Training College in Leicester. And even then, back in the day, that was known, this is years and years ago, before I was born, so back in the 60s or very early 70s, it was known as the brothel on the hill to the people in Leicester because of the moral degeneracy then. Half a century or more ago, that is what it was, and now they're even worse.
And these are the people that are supposed to be teaching future generations of children, right?
Yep, there you are. Yep.
There was once a time when having a 4-year college degree actually meant something. Now, almost everybody goes to college. And a lot of these 4-year degrees end up being kind of meaningless. Like you said, you're just saddled with a bunch of debt. To me, it seems to me that really almost the only reason you want to get a 4-year degree is if you have a plan to get a higher degree after that, because you need to. For instance, if you're going to law school to become a lawyer, you have to go through 4 years. If you're going to become a doctor, you have to go through 4 years. So unless you have that plan of getting some higher postgraduate degree,
a vocational degree, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Then it just seems these days almost meaningless, to get that BA or BS degree.
We had the same conversation in 1983 when I was going into petroleum engineering. It was young urban professionals, the yuppies, that's what we were. And we actually felt, and this is conversation, we actually knew we were kind of selling out because we were being trained to do a job. We knew that. But we weren't being educated. We were having that conversation in 1983 about you're going to be actually a degree worth having, a liberal arts degree in the true sense of liberal arts, being taught how to think. Thomas Aquinas College in California, for instance, maybe Christendom College, Magdalen College. These colleges that teach you how to actually think in a good way, in a Catholic way, in a true way. But we were being trained to do a job, and we were like, well, if we go there, how are you going to come out and not have a job? So there's 3 categories really how it could fall. You could have this meaningless underwater BB stacking, curriculum, or you could have an actual true liberal arts education where you're actually being taught how to be a good person, really, and a good participator in the state and everything in a right sense. Or you can be trained to do a job that you're going to come out and make a good living at. So those type of things are the 3 areas. But I would have to say that it's good to probably go to the junior colleges. Keep your expense low, stay at home, get your credits all up that'll transfer easy at a junior college, and then if you need a degree somewhere to get the job or higher education.
And speaking of staying at home, like I was saying earlier, my entire approach to higher education has completely changed. Because in my household, I was raised with the notion that education is everything. It's everything. And so there was a lot of pressure on all of the children. You must get some sort of doctoral degree, either preferably become a medical doctor, if not, get a PhD. Education was everything, because for my father, that's how he kind of lifted himself out of poverty. He became, valedictorian of his school, all of that. So it was always pushed on us, education, education, education. And preferably an Ivy League school. So that was very important for us. And as you know, I do have an academic background. I do have some multiple higher degrees from Oxford University and Notre Dame Law School, all of that. But when it comes to my children now as a Catholic, my first concern is not their intellect, it's their soul. And there are too many stories, too many cases of good, solid young Catholics going off to college and completely losing their faith, just going off the rails because they're not around their family, they're not around a community that kind of anchors them. They fall in with the wrong group of people, and then and they're young. 18, you're still, these days especially, it's young. Maybe 50 years ago, they were like adults back then. These days, it's still very young, very tender, very impressionable. So my entire approach has changed. I no longer care about the Ivy League anymore. To me, it's, okay, let's stay home for a few years first so that you have that anchor here at home, and we go to Mass and all of that. You're still going to get a good education at a local university. It might not be like the top tier. And he could go, like I said, because he's being courted by like the best, and they're giving him full scholarships. But I'm turning them all down, so he can stay local, get a good education, but most of all, preserve his faith and preserve his soul. Because that really, parents, that should matter more than anything. It should matter more than any Ivy League degree that you could get for your son or your daughter.
We haven't really blown up the Catholic education yet here on the show. We have on past shows. We've written articles about it. Real quick primer out there. If you think you're going to, send him to Notre Dame, or send him to some other Catholic school. Once again, are you going to get a Catholic education? A lot of times, no. It started with 1967, Land O'Lakes. We know there was two Theodores involved, Theodore Hesburgh and Theodore McCarrick. If you don't know either one of those, look on our site. Hesburgh was in charge of Notre Dame, and McCarrick was in charge of the pedos in this country, or forming them. So they basically emancipated universities, Catholic universities, 26 top-tier leaders in the Catholic universities signed this document in Wisconsin, Land O'Lakes, that said we are going to be emancipated from any control, the Catholic theological or philosophical control, we're basically emancipated from the Catholic Church. Now the problem, and therefore they could teach anything they wanted and go over any type of curriculum. My question, though, was that even a valid thought process? If truth is truth, truth cannot contradict truth. Theological truth, uncreated truth cannot contradict created truth, natural truth. So that's the bottom line between science and theology. Truth cannot contradict truth. So if somehow it is, then you either misunderstand the theological truth or you misunderstand the natural sciences somehow. And especially at the Catholic University, what are you going to be contradicting? How is, can there be such a thing as woke math? That's true.
You would be surprised.
Catholic, really?
Yeah.
So that whole thing was just a farce from the beginning, but basically was just an ability to indoctrinate instead of educate at Catholic universities and lose the Catholic identity. The brakes were pushed on that by John Paul II, 1990, Ex Corde Ecclesiae. That document that came out and said, get back to a Catholic identity. And to do that, you have to have Catholic personnel. Personnel is policy. Get back to hiring Catholic staff at a Catholic university, and you'll get back on track with Catholic universities. But that was the long and the short of it. Therefore, Catholic universities since 1967, many of them have gone off the rails and gone off the rails very badly. Yeah. So even more so, keep kids local until they're older, get their credits all piled up. You won't have massive debt. You'll have lots of good credits that can transfer to wherever you need to, and you don't have to worry about indoctrination at these places.
Yeah, because I think ultimately it comes down to a question of what sort of person do you want to be? As the putative student, you're 16, 17, what have you, and you're looking and to say, okay, what am I going to go and learn? Am I going to just say, I'm just going to step straight into the industrial economic market, and I'm not going to get some kind of vocational training, I'm not going to get an apprenticeship, I'm not going to get some academic degree, I'm just going to step straight in, and that's it. Okay, maybe not the best choice, but if that's the kind of person you want to be, you can still be the man that God wants you to be at that point, because it's about your faith, it's about your morals, it's about what you're going to do. If you want to say, you know what, I want to go and really get some heft in order to be making some economic power, okay, well, there are ways to do that. You can become, as you say, a professional. You can become a doctor or a lawyer, a surgeon, and so forth. You can get one of those, very intellectual vocational degrees. You can go away and say, you know what, I'm going to get an apprenticeship. There's one still out there. You can say, I'm going to step in and get an engineering degree and then go to work for, like here in Detroit, go work for one of the big three, or go to work for one of these other companies that are demanding engineers. Many people nowadays, it's like, let's go with software, let's go with digital digital education and get some of that and go to do that. Or you can say, you know what, I just want to be like a really well-educated person. I'm just going to plow all my time into doing that. But ultimately, it's like you've got to be the first answer to what kind of man, what kind of person do I want to be? I want to be a faithful man. I want to be a authentic human being, which means being in accord with Jesus Christ. That's got to be your foundation. And I think so many people these days with education just kind of forgetting that. They're like, oh, I've got to rush and get the letters after my name. I've got to get the qualifications. I've got to get this opportunity to make money, to be, educated and just know a bunch of stuff. And it's like you have all this knowledge, but it's leading you away from the truth.
Well, sort of like a keeping up with the Joneses, right? It almost seems that getting an undergrad degree, a bachelor's, is like equivalent to a high school diploma nowadays. And it seems that, getting, a master's degree, a post whatever, a doctorate even, it seems like that's the real college. It seems like that's where people are shooting for. And it's just this kind of prideful race to, again, see how many letters you can get behind your name. You might have letters behind your name, and that might be, qualify you for certain jobs, but it's not everyone, and we have gifted children, but we have children that we know. I know, raising my own children, I'm like, this particular kid or whatever, he might not be splitting the atom. He might not be set out for, for lawyer, doctor, or whatever. And then you have to make the decision as a parent to say, well, is college even necessary for all of my children? I think the answer is no. Growing up, my parents' generation and back, trying to pull themselves out of, some sort of poverty and having this notion that we're always going to keep progressing and advancing and my kids are going to do better than I am. And that's not always the case. Your kids might do just as well as you would, and that's fine. We have to realize that.
There's another interesting thing emerging these days about blending the Vortex with the philosophical liberal arts. There's a place in Grand Rapids, I wish I would have looked it up before the show, but there's two places in the country that are doing this. And they're actually allowing you to be trained in something in 4 years that you can actually make a living from, whether it's plumbing, electrical ductwork, whatever it is, something Vortex. And at the same time, get St. Thomas, get the humanities, get the catechism, and learn your faith. So they're really blending the two. They're sensitive. If you start looking for this out there, they're sensitive to the two issues, which, like I said, we were talking about in 1983. Do I be trained to be an actual, a good person, a thinking individual? Am I educated? Or am I being trained to do a high-tech job? Yeah. So we opted to be trained to be doing a high-tech job because that's just what made the money at the time. But we longed for being educated at the same time, and we knew that we were missing out on that when we were going for the education.
So you're really talking about this sort of hybrid model.
It's really a hybrid model. It's recent. Parents out there, email us. We can put it in the link. There's two places in the country that are doing this right now. One's in Grand Rapids, and the other one, I don't know if it's Missouri or where, but there's two different institutions that are blending these two as a hybrid model that are just sensitive to both things. When you come out, you're going to be able to make a living, and two, you actually got educated, and three, you didn't get indoctrinated.
Yeah, you see, because that's one of the most interesting things with it, that you can come along and you can get a good, solid grounding in the liberal arts, which are called the liberal arts because they were the arts practiced by a free man, a liberal. That's what it's there. It's not the sense
in a good sense.
A man who is free, a man who is not a bondsman, a man who is not a serf. He had the opportunity to learn that. So you can get a good, solid grounding in those. And so you can have the level of conversation which is intellectually stimulating, which allows you to converse with your friends and other people, which allows you to understand the great books and to go through and do this, which allows you to go, you know what, I thought that was a great book. Let me get the Spark Notes and go through it, and you can wrap your head around it. You can get all of that, and it doesn't require a 4-year degree to do it. When you actually think about it, the average 4-year college these days is very sad. How much time are you actually spending learning stuff? You've got your professors who are probably just reading from the book they wrote. You could go and buy it. It's probably a fortune, but never mind. You can probably go and get many of these facts, these pieces of information for free on the internet. You can get this information in there. You can sit there and discuss it with other people in the study groups, you know, and how much time do you spend at this 4-year college going away and getting drunk and debauched and going and participating in all of these other things that are seen to be part of college life? Well, okay, you know what? No, they don't have to be that kind of thing. And I think that is something, if somebody wants to say, look, I'm a man with an education, and you've got this like nice broad base that maybe isn't, you know, hugely deep, but you've got this great broad base of literature and the humanities and history and science and math. You can get that stuff yourself, and you can earn that by the time you've turned 25, 30, 40, 50. You can still learn this stuff. Nowadays, we sat here and we discussed, you know, the problems of the internet and the evils. I would set against all of the problems of the internet the fact that the entirety of human knowledge is available at a single click of a button, and that you can have this stuff and people are providing it for you, and you can really get a liberal education now.
It's open to everybody.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And on the topic of indoctrination, obviously we know it's happening at college campuses everywhere. I mean, just everywhere they're going woke. But it's also happening, as we know, in elementary schools as well, as we know now from, you know, the school board meetings and things like that, where they're trying to introduce the LGBT stuff and the even pornographic material, all of that. And I would encourage Catholics out there, if you are sending your children to a local school, public school, obviously you have to be extremely vigilant. But if you're able to run for, you know, like a school board position, do it. Do it. During the last election, so many school boards flipped from liberal to conservative simply because conservative moms were so angry about what was going on. You know, they are the ones who made their voices heard at these meetings, and they were so angry. They're like, I am not letting this happen to my children. I'm going to run. I'm going to get a position. And so many of these school boards flipped from liberal to conservative. So I would urge Catholics, do that if you can. Go there, be one of on the school board, and help prevent this flood of evil from coming into your school.
Yeah, and then Kyle, once again, you have to take a leading role in educating your children. You know, Simon, you said what type of person you want to be. Well, that's going to be coming from the home life. When they're 7, 8, 9, you're talking about reading humanities to the kids, get them formed up, sharing your faith with them, being an example for them.
Yeah, and this is really something that's quite easy to do in terms of accessibility in our day and age. Like Simon mentioned, you could pretty much for free get a whole education that you would have spent, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars on before the advent of the internet. But now with the internet, we can do that, and it's really all free. So you really have to have that. It's sort of a vocational call of being, a self-taught, continued learner, a lifelong learner, so to speak. And, you know, it does start with the parents. You know, a lot of parents who freak out about homeschooling, and rightly so. We were some of those parents as well. Have really come to the realization that, you know, there's so much assistance out there for you. That you don't have to, you know, well, how am I going to teach my kid math? I don't have a master's in math. Are you smarter than a 5th grader? That's what I asked them. Didn't you go through elementary school education? Even if it was at a crappy public school, you learned something. You learned how to do division. Learn along with your kids. Even if you don't know the thing, sit down with them, get the teacher's manual, go through it. I mean, that's a great bonding experience for child and parent as well.
And to be honest, just on the subject of math, I mean, it's actually kind of become a bit of a meme that you can go on YouTube and there are all these Indian fellows who do math courses. And so all of these Indian fellows do these math courses on there, and it's become a joke and it's a meme. It's like, you know, I've learned more from this Indian chap on YouTube than I did in my 4-year math degree. And it's like, well, okay, that may very well be true. But you can go through and learn any subject from these teachers. And here's the interesting thing. They will actually teach you, in many cases, what is true as opposed to what the educational system is teaching you, which in often cases is wrong. And not just wrong from like maybe like a moral perspective or something. Okay, so I know this because my grandfather was the chief aerodynamicist of British Aerospace. And he designed all of the bombers and stuff that we never got to use in the Cold War. And so he taught me how aeroplanes fly. Aeroplanes do not fly because the pressure is lower on the top of the wing than underneath. That's just what everyone tells you. Aeroplanes fly because they cut through the... It's a long story, but anyway, he explained this to me. When I went to secondary school and we were taught the bits of aerodynamics within physics, we were taught the wrong thing. because that is what is taught. People are still taught that aeroplanes fly one particular way, and they actually manage to do it in a different way. I know this because my grandfather taught me, but you know what? All of that information is accessible online, and you can get there and get the discussions and get these different mathematical theories and science theories and all of these things, and look at them and understand them and weigh them yourself and become an educated individual without that indoctrination. Don't even talk about moral indoctrination. It's just indoctrination of, oh, this is the scientific consensus. I assure you there is no such thing.
And I'd like to punctuate too when Christine was saying the highest thing out there now is the soul, right? What's on the top of my view for my children is the soul. And more than any information, more than your job, you know, how much money you're going to make, the prestige of having all the education is your soul. I think that's where a Catholic home, and even Christian homes, have to start with. And that vocation, I always understood vocation was a calling to either the priesthood, religious life, and yet we all have that vocation to be saints. Every single person's called, not just to get to heaven, but to be a saint. And that has to be taught to children at a very young age. And this is only one part of the role then. One part of the journey in life is the whole path of education, because I believe it's still a statistic that most people, whatever their degree was in, they're going to be switching fields within 4 years down the road. So on average. So the idea that you're going to be locked into this for the rest of your life is not even a true thing too. So you really have to give them, what is the goal of your journey through life? It's to get to heaven, but to be a saint when you're in heaven, not just to be with God, but to be like God and to be embracing God, and not just to be in the cheap seats in the beatific vision, you know, kind of looking down with all the little beanies on the, you know, what's going on, but actually being on the front and center 50-yard line, you know, watching this game, you know, the Trinity, the dynamic of all that with the communion of saints close up, you know, right in the flame.
And as parents too, we also have to be open, and we should encourage our children as well, be open to the possibility that God may be calling you to the religious or religious life or the priesthood. And so we as parents, you know, especially those who may be very ambitious and, oh, I want you to get that Ivy League college degree, got to be open to the possibility that, hey, maybe God is calling your son or your daughter to a different path. As parents, we have to be open to that, and then also encourage our children, look into this. Obviously, you have to be very, very careful which seminary you send your child to, because yeah, I would be afraid if my son were being called to the vocation of priesthood, which as far as I know he's not, but I would be afraid considering the landscape we have right now.
Yeah, that just flashed in my mind too when you were saying about going to the priesthood, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what seminary would you send him to?
But we need good priests though.
You can't homeschool a seminary, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we did, well, also when we did go to the seminary, we spent, and Voris can say this too, that we spent more time looking up what the teacher was teaching and how that, you know, what should have been taught, how rounded out. I mean, there's two things going on. One, what is the teacher teaching? You got to regurgitate that for the class, right? But then there's so many other questions that opened up because of what the teacher's teaching that aren't even going to be covered in that class. And then also, is the teacher giving a spin in some way, shape, or form that you need to counter? Whether you want to do it in class, don't speak up, you'll just get kicked out. But for your own for your own education, for your own formation, and you also talk to other, like Sacred Heart Seminary. When I was there, the big thing was Christ didn't know who he was, right? And even the Eucharist, all these particles, or these, every single one, is that Jesus? Those questions were coming from seminarians. And so it's like, well, and then people would come and ask me about it, and I'd be like, well, this is and they'd say, well, you mean my teacher's a heretic? I didn't say that. You asked me a question. This is what St. Thomas teaches.
Who is not a heretic.
But that means this guy's a heretic. I didn't say he's a heretic. All I'm saying is all they have to do is say, well, so-and-so said somebody's a heretic, and you're bound. So wherever you go, you know what? The devil has all sorts of traps, but you have to, this is the life you have, and you have to live it. Teach your kids well at home. Get them prepared. Be open to whatever paths that God's calling them to. But, you're still their parent, too, and you got to protect them and safeguard them and all that. So I hope that, the parents out there get some help by this particular episode here, and know that it's very difficult, kind of scary at times, but also there's that confidence that God cares about your kids more than you do and has their path already packed out. It's just for us to, follow that path and help them do the same. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. The Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve. A te suspiramus gementes efflentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. Omni Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of The Download. We'll be premiering a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.